All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. I do educational material on this channel, videos about uh, all kinds of different subjects that you probably don't know anything about, but I think they're important because I've done a lot of research, a lot of digging, and dug into some old crackpots who everybody's dismissed, but they spent their whole life working on something and they came out with something special. But sometimes they either were censored out or they just didn't put it on a silver platter for people, and so it's kind of hard to dig it out. I've tried to make these things a little bit more accessible. In this case, we're looking at Dewey B. Larson, one of my heroes. One of the main reasons he's one of my heroes is that all of his most important books came out after his 80th birthday. So, if you're, uh, digging on something, if you've got some kind of passion in life, you might have to wait, but you will get it done eventually. So, Larson is the author of the Reciprocal System of Theory. And this is a theory of everything that purports to be able to penetrate any subject and come up with coherent and correct answers. Now, he did, his earlier works were all on the hard sciences like physics and chemistry. We're looking at right now, we're going to go back to those eventually, but right now we're looking at his final book that came out after he died, called Beyond Space and Time. And this is his digging into metaphysics. So philosophy, religion, and psychology. And for Larson, metaphysics was what is beyond space and time, independent of space and time. And space and time is a very important part of his theory because in Larson's world, the universe is not made out of matter and the universe is not made out of energy, but the universe is made out of motion. So Larson has a universe of motion. That's the title of one of his books on astronomy. And motion is the relationship between space and time. Okay, we know the most basic motion that we know of is speed. Speed is measured in space over time. 10 miles of space in 1 hour of time. The bike is going 10 miles per hour. But every other scientific phenomenon that you can think of is also a relationship between space and time. And in Larson's system, space and time are really the same, other than they are reciprocals of each other. So space and time have the exact same qualities, but they are reciprocals of each other in the same way that 2/3 and 3/2 are reciprocals of each other. They both contain a 2 and a 3, but they are inverted. Space is the inversion of time and vice versa. But it's a little more complicated than that because space and time are both multidimensional. We know space to be 3 or more dimensions, and as a result of the reciprocal postulate, time is also 3 or more dimensions. What we know about time is that it's always progressing, it's always getting later and later, it's flowing. So too space is also therefore flowing, progressing. Things are always getting farther and farther apart. And that was observed by the Hubble telescope way back in the 1920s. All of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. Now that's what Larson calls a scalar motion. It's a motion with no direction, but a magnitude. So you can envision that as a balloon. If you put a bunch of dots on the balloon, you blow up the balloon, all the dots are moving away from each other. Or if you cook some raisin bread, you put the raisins in the bread, and then it starts cooking and expanding, all of the raisins are moving away from each other, but in no particular direction. The further away they are, the faster they're moving away from each other. Now, the other part about space and time that is notable is that they are both quantized. They both are only come in discrete units. There's no you know continuum. There's no smoothness to space and time. They come in chunks, even though those chunks are so small that you hardly are able to notice them, just like sands in an hourglass or something like that. It looks like a smooth progression, but it's really just one grain at a time. And so therefore, space and time come in discrete units, and 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, which we saw is speed. Space over time is speed. 1 unit of space over 1 unit of time is the speed of light. The speed of light in Larson's universe is the midpoint or the null point or the neutral point or even the origin of that universe. And there's an entire half of the universe that's moving faster than the speed of light. Larson calls that the cosmic sector, or sector 2, in addition to the material sector, the sector we're familiar with, slower than the speed of light. He calls that sector 1, or the material universe. Now, the material universe builds up through aggregation to its most complex level, which is DNA, a few billion atoms per molecule. At that level, it becomes eligible to be controlled by a sector 2 entity, an entity from the faster than speed of light universe. And when those two things come together in the right proportion and the right configuration, they form what Larson calls the life unit. And this starts out from the lowest level of the life unit and evolves and develops up into its most complex level, which Larson says is the intelligent human being. And at that point, the intelligent human being comes under the control, gradually, very slowly, of an entity from sector 3. Sector 3 is this metaphysical region that he's talking about, the region that is beyond or independent of space and time. I would suggest that this might actually be the speed of light itself. And so at that point, this sector 3 begins to communicate with humans and giving them insight into ethical behavior, good behavior, just behavior, whereas sector 2 is directed towards survival. So those things sometimes work in harmony and sometimes they work in conflict. When they are in conflict, the human being has to be able to decide which way to go based on their free will. Now, we are in chapter 25 of Larson's final book, Beyond Space and Time, and he's discussing, it's called Outlook for Communication. So he's talking about various communications between Sector 3 and the intelligent human, variously called ESP, intuition, scientific insight, religious revelation, and so on. And right here, he's talking about miracles and trying to put miracles into some kind of scientific categorization. So we'll start here. These are Larson's words. Whether they call for miracles or not, there can be little doubt but that a substantial proportion of the petitions currently being addressed to the deity are improper. Requests for special or preferential treatment, for example, probably outnumber all others, but such requests are not at all consistent with the ethical code. Now, the ethical code is kind of like the composite of all of the communications that we get from Sector 3, and we can put them together into some kind of tapestry where we understand kind of what the code of right and wrong, good and evil is. And so he calls that the ethical code. Requests, prayers for special or preferential treatment are not at all consistent with the ethical code. He quotes one philosopher who calls it greedy supplications for special favors. Also, the pleas for mercy that are encouraged by most religious leaders belong in the same class. They ask that the petitioner be exempted from whatever penalties may be assessed against others. This is the biological code, Sector 2. Whenever you're talking about biology, you're talking about Sector 2. This is the biological code, the me first doctrine, and it is directly opposed to the golden rule, the essence of which is that we should ask no more for ourselves than that which is given to others. Now, I don't know why Larson's doing this, because he has already gone over the golden rule in detail, but he never gave this particular definition of the golden rule. He was talking about do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and I was criticizing that because it's not universal. It's a guideline, but for me that's not universal, because what if you are a sadomasochist? Or what if you are a intravenous drug user, drug addict? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So are you going to go out and whip people or inject people with heroin because that's what you want? So that doesn't add up for me, the golden rule. It's a useful guideline, but to me it's not a universal. But here he's redefining the golden rule, saying the essence of which is that we should ask no more for ourselves than that which is given to others. That is a little bit of a different connotation, I think, and maybe deserves to be looked at a little bit more closely. Okay, back to Larson. Although the present investigation has not gone into these matters extensively enough to justify any firm conclusions, the preliminary survey seems to indicate that, if it is to be effective, prayer must be concerned with matters that involve human actions, not physical events. In familiar language, this means that one should pray only for wisdom or moral courage, either for himself or on behalf of others. Whether or not this tentative conclusion is correct is a question of major significance to the human race, and an exhaustive study of the subject is certainly justified, with the cooperation of religious organizations if possible, but without if necessary. A comprehensive study should ultimately result in delimiting the range of subjects with respect to which prayer is appropriate, and this will enable some studies of the relative effectiveness of different procedures. Few observers are likely to believe that such a study would find the prayer wheels of Tibet very effective. But yet the truth is that many modern procedures, not only in prayer but also in other attempts at metaphysical communication, are equally as perfunctory as these wheels. The efficacy of group prayer, for instance, is open to serious question in view of the highly individualistic character of the intersector communication in general. Of course, it is quite possible that group activities of this nature have a meaning in and a value to institutional religion that is separate and apart from the communication that is the ostensible purpose. But some inquiry into this situation ought to be in order. The efforts that are currently being made to apply group techniques to the discovery of new solutions for scientific, economic, and other problems seem to have a somewhat similar rationale and could well be studied in the same connection. The only one of the intersector communication processes thus far discussed which has been subjected to any kind of a systematic study is telepathy, which, with the related process clairvoyance, the direct perception of information, is currently being investigated under the general name of ESP, extrasensory perception. Clairvoyance is essentially equivalent to intuition, the only difference being in the nature of the information that is sought. An individual's conclusion with respect to the morality of a proposed action would be ascribed to his intuitive understanding of right and wrong, whereas his correct perception of the nature of a hidden object in an experimental situation would be ascribed to clairvoyance. The results obtained to date from the ESP experiments have been meager. As indicated in the discussion of the subject in the earlier pages, it would be correct to say that certain aspects of these experiments have demonstrated the reality of the ESP phenomena, but knowledge has not advanced much beyond this point. This lack of progress can be attributed to a number of causes. Some of these, such as the insistence on coupling psychokinesis with ESP, thus saddling ESP with all of the shortcomings of the psychokinesis hypothesis, can be laid at the door of the experimenters themselves. Others, such as the exaggerated degree of skepticism with which the results of the experiments are received, and the general lack of support of ESP research, are chargeable to the scientific community as a whole. It is apparent, however, from the findings of this work that more meaningful results cannot be expected until the investigators have a better understanding of how to proceed. Clearly, some further information of a basic nature is required before ESP experimenters can be so planned and executed that they will give conclusive answers to the questions that are being investigated. One of the most important issues we find is the matter of motivation. What we may call routine communication with Sector 3, intuitive access to simple information, has the benefit of a high-powered transmitter, and most individuals have no difficulty receiving the messages in the ordinary course of life. Reception of complex and specialized information, such as in revelation and scientific insight, is much more difficult. Examination of the various methods of intersector communication from the standpoint of the characteristics that they have in common indicates that, in all instances, the individual who receives one of these extraordinary communications is a person who is specifically qualified in the field of knowledge that is involved, and who is able, because of a strong motivation, to exclude other matters and devote practically his entire attention to the one subject matter under consideration. The essential requirement seems to be an intense interest in the success of the undertaking, coupled with the absence of competing thought processes. Insight or revelation is not in itself a thought process in the ordinary sense of the term. On the contrary, it is the total lack of resemblance to the ordinary processes of thought that gives rise to such expressions as flashes of insight, and causes those who comment on these metaphysical modes of communication to use adjectives such as incomprehensible, miraculous, etc. But the message cannot be consciously perceived by a recipient unless it is converted into a thought process of some kind. Aside from the possibility discussed in Chapter 11, nothing is yet known about how such a conversion is accomplished. But evidently, the probability of success is enhanced if the mind is cleared of extraneous matters and the entire thought mechanism is held in readiness to receive the message. Now, this is, again, more like it for me. I was criticizing Larson a couple days ago because of his not really understanding that really meditation is not thinking. It's not, he was saying be alone with your thoughts, and he was saying, concentrating on your thoughts. But here he's saying the entire thought mechanism is held in readiness to receive the message. The thought mechanism is held. And that's, to me, much more like it. You have to not think in order to be open to these messages. Okay, back to Larson. Our findings further indicate that transmission of a Sector 3 message is a much more difficult operation than reception of a message. So that's in prayer. Transmission of a message to sector 3. Okay, instead of the intuition or whatever, which is a transmission from sector 3. An individual must be in a special mental or emotional state of a nature not yet understood in order to transmit such a message to another human being, which is telepathy. And remember, all intelligent human beings do have a sector 3 component, so which he calls level 3. So telepathy would be the communication between two sector 3 entities in humans, whereas prayer would be communication between a sector 3 entity and a human and sector 3 in general. And then intuition would be sector 3 in general communicating to the sector 3 entity within a human. Okay, back to Larson. Whether the same degree of preparedness is required in order to transmit a message to sector 3, prayer or equivalent, is not clear because of the lack of reliable knowledge as to the results of prayer. It may be reasonably assumed, however, that prayer is the inverse of intuition. The intuitive process pairs a high-powered transmitter with a relatively inefficient receiver. Prayer reverses this combination and pairs a relatively inefficient transmitter with a very sensitive receiver. On this basis, we could expect that it is equally as effective as intuition. Okay, we'll leave it there and take over here in chapter 25 when we start up tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day and hope to see you soon.